But first, a quick recap of a prior presentation where we laid out the general argument for a mode-based system as opposed to a relative scale-based system, arguing that in particular on the guitar, although it does work for other instruments, including the piano as well, it will be easier for us to navigate around the fretboard, memorize the fretboard in such a way that we can be more mobile on it. Noting and remembering that our musical system has 12 notes in it, we will typically apply our musical formula, which we're going to accept a priori for now, meaning we're just going to accept it as is, possibly diving a little bit deeper into why it was created in the future, that resulting in 7 notes. So this is going to be our scale, which we often start off thinking as the major scale, but noting that if I renumber the system from any point in the scale, that gives us our modes, the most common second mode being the minor scale, otherwise known as the Aeolian mode, which would simply be numbered with this as the 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can see that our whole system is based on this idea of renumbering the modes within a particular system. So I'm arguing here then what we should be centering around to learn faster would be to memorize the actual relative positions on the guitar by what you might call a nodal centered system or a modal centered system. So remember, the 3 ways that you might learn all of the positions on the guitar are: 1, memorize all the notes, which is good, but it's not something that can help you to play within a system of 7 notes, because you're not playing all 12 notes. You're going to be at least centering around some type of scale, which is a collection of 7 notes, which you could further trim down if you wanted to a 5-note scale from those 7 notes. You could also memorize the fretboard in terms of relative positions, meaning I'm going to give it the major scale position. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3. That has its advantages because then you can shift those relative positions as we go from a C major, shifting up to a D major or D sharp, and so on and so forth. But you end up with 7 different numbering systems within the same set of diatonic scales, within the same set of modes. That becomes a problem for memorizing the fretboard. So what can we do instead? Memorize the modal position, which we usually name with these Greek letter names, but you will in the future apply a numbering system that will be absolute, not relative, won't change, and therefore those points will always be the same. So whether we're shifting our focal point within a particular shape, that would be changing our focal point within one of the 7 modes with the same 7 notes, the same diatonic scale, or whether we're moving from one relative position and shifting, copying, and pasting the whole thing up, we will then still be able to identify that this relative position is the Ionian position. No matter what note it happens to be, it's going to be in the same relative shape, just like copying and pasting in an Excel worksheet. Now, if you accept that argument, that that's the easiest thing to memorize, which I think is unquestionable, then you're going to be led to the problem of the current system that we have. The way we write things down is based on renumbering every time we move to a different chord. So that means that our interval naming system, as well as our chord naming system, is based on forcing us to change the relative position of every note as we move through the modes. Not only that, but it also results in the same name for different chord shapes as we move through, as we look at different shapes within our position. In other words, if I'm going to play a C with these 7 notes, if I play what we would typically call in a major scale a 1-4-5, chords built off of the 1, the 4, and the 5, we're going to name all 3 of those chords under the traditional system as a major chord. Why is that a problem? Because it basically, as though we're going to start thinking as though we're moving through 3 different shapes, meaning C major to F major to G major, which isn't really what we're usually thinking of. We're playing 3 different chords that fit in the same master shape. So if we were to change our naming convention to a modal-centered system, then that would more naturally tell ourselves exactly what we're doing. So again, I know that sounds, we're going to get a little bit into the weeds here, a lot into the weeds, but I'm just going to list out the consequences. And remember that each step along the way, you can then ask the question of how much benefit would I have if I learned something in a more efficient system? I'm going to argue that the way we're looking at it, if there wasn't any historical context, would be more efficient. And then the question is always, well, if I'm going to learn that particular part or that particular system, is that benefit great enough that I would have to overcome the problem of translation or bridging to the current system kind of for communication? Now, I would argue that this learning a modal structure is undoubtedly worth your time. And then every step we go from there, as we then look into the naming conventions, then again, you have to keep on repeating and asking these questions. I'll make the argument in more detail in future presentations. We'll just list out what the consequences will basically be.